folks, Ariel over here, where today what I'm trying to do is, well, hopefully actually here in a minute, get some seeds planted, but in these two beds where you can see, hi baby boy, see the dirt still mounted up, these are my last two spots where I'm filling dirt. All total in my garden, I've got about 350 cubic yards of, or sorry, cubic feet, not cubic yards, 350 cubic feet of dirt in here, and this is the same thing I'd started last fall before the snow shut me down for the year. I've just, because there's a lot of little rocks in the soil, even after having dug it away from all the very big rocks, I've just been hand-picking through all of those cubic feet of soil to try to remove, not every single one, but the majority at least of the rocks, because when roots run into stuff that size, that makes it a little tough for them to grow efficiently. So that is what I am finishing up here and pulling out any little weeds that were starting to grow. This soil, if you're new here, is out of the old garden, which was right behind me. Just moving it into what should now be my little gopher-proof bed so that I can actually eat the stuff I plant this year, which will be exciting. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing. What I actually wanted to talk about was greenhouses. I've been asked this question and answered it a whole ton of times over the years, and it came up again, of course, a whole bunch the other day when I posted those videos sharing my parents' little greenhouse and part of their tomato growing for a cash crop operation. So anyway, this question has been asked a whole lot. Why don't you have a greenhouse? Aren't you going to build a greenhouse? Wouldn't you be able to grow lots of things like tomatoes if you had a greenhouse, etc.? So I just wanted to do a whole video addressing that topic, and I'm too busy to just sit and talk, so you will have to listen to me talk while I work. And you'll probably hear birds in the background, including my little hummingbirds, which are buzzing all over, and the creek, which is raging with snow melt down below me. Anyway, a greenhouse. I don't know how many of you folks have ever worked in one, used one, had one. I'm sure some of you have. Probably not everybody. I am somewhat familiar with them. I used to work in one for about 4 years as a job, growing veggies and flowers. And anyway, so what a greenhouse does is it's usually some kind of semi or transparent structure, so it's often made out of either glass or plastic, and it lets light in and helps retain some heat and keep some cold out, etc. It works a little bit like if you have ever driven a vehicle on a warm sunny day and parked it, especially with the nose facing into the sunshine. You come back, it is or even a cold sunny day, but a sunny day, even if it's cold, if you live somewhere that's cold, you'll know this. If it's closed up, the glass will absorb heat, then let that through and not let it back out. And you get in your car and it'll be really hot. Now, greenhouses do certainly do that. What they do not do is magically keep the heat in. Neither glass nor plastic are particularly good at insulating. That's why most houses are not built out of purely glass or plastic, at least in areas where you have cold weather. And you probably know this as well, because you could park that nose of your car into the sun, and even if it's below freezing outside, you could get in, and at midday when the sun's shining on it, it could easily be, well over 100 degrees in there. But if you wait till nighttime, if it's 10 degrees at night, your car will go back to being 10 degrees inside. So it doesn't magically keep the heat inside. So there's a few issues with why I don't have a greenhouse. One of the ones, of course, is the somewhat temporary nature of my residency in this physical location. Right now, I can pack up my house, all these concrete blocks, fold up my solar panel frames, fold up my swinging chairs, and roll out of here to a new spot. A greenhouse structure would provide a whole additional challenge of things to move at some point. So that's one issue. But back to the insulation. So it gets really cold here. This is why I need to do a whole video to talk about this, because it's hard to explain in short order. I don't officially have a growing season here. And what I mean by that, obviously I do grow things, but what I mean by that is if you look up a growing season for your area, wherever that is, there's little calculators online where you can look this up. It probably has a expected first or last frost date in the spring and expected first frost date in the fall, and the days in between are what's generally considered your growing season, where you can grow most vegetables and stuff without expecting them to freeze. And of course those are averages, so some years you could have something out of the norm happen and have a frost in between there. And you'll see when you go to buy a packet of seeds, it'll often tell you it requires a so many day growing season. This plant will mature in 50 days or 110 days or whatever the case is, depending what the plant is. And if you put in, say, my parents' area, where they do indeed get winter and snow, just not nearly as much as I do, into one of those little calculators, it will spit out, I forget what the exact dates are, but it'll spit out a first and last frost date and tell you that their growing season is something like 165 days, I think. If you put my area into one of those calculators, what it will tell you is that there is no applicable growing season year-round frost risk. And that is true. We can get frost, and often do, every few nights all summer, and it can snow any month out of the year. Now our snow stays on the ground, a solid snowpack for at least 8 months a year. Actually, just this morning, if I had turned the camera on earlier, I could have showed you the last little snow pile I can see from the house over there. Just melted this morning, and there's still over the shady side down there in the trees where you can't quite see them from the house. There's still several piles that are a few feet deep, and that wasn't plowed or pushed there or anything. That's just the natural snow. Anyway, so I don't officially have a growing season. And I get all kinds of lovely suggestions from people who I know wish me well, who wonder if I've read, Elliot Coleman's books or other various, winter and cold weather gardening books. I have indeed. I like his books. I've read all of them many years ago. Maybe not all, but at least a lot. I'm not sure exactly how many he wrote. And many books by other people on cold climate gardening, and I own copies of most of them and so on. I am very familiar with them. Basically, what I grow here in the summer happens because I use the techniques that most people use for winter gardening. Because, I don't have an actual growing season without frost. So I do grow things here in the summer, but all of the methods I use are winter gardening methods. And people are often suggesting I try winter gardening methods to extend my season into, early in the spring and late in the fall. That just doesn't actually work here because I'm already needing all of those little helps and adjustments and such to grow things in the summer. If you've been around here any length of time, go to the channel homepage. If you haven't, you can see videos on my garden when it was right over there, and all the things I have grown successfully and a few of the things that I have not, and how I set up my frost covers and so on. So, I do use most of these things. The raised beds here are going to, I think, help a little bit with keeping the soil just a little warmer, a little longer. I had wanted to avoid adding this much infrastructure here that I know I'm going to have to move eventually, but I'm not moving today, and growing food is very important to me. So I made the choice last fall to put these in, even though I know I will have to move them at some point in the future. Anyway, so there's the movability issue with the greenhouse. And then there's the growing climate. So greenhouses can be used to grow things in the winter if, because of what I talked about a minute ago with the vehicles, you know, how it'll get hot during the day, but then it still gets way below freezing at night. And if you can picture, if you put a tomato plant on your dash, it might be comfortable during the day, or it may actually cook to death during the day if it gets hot enough in there, even if it's cold outside. And then at night, it will most assuredly freeze. And that's just exactly what a greenhouse would do, unless you can manage that temperature with some artificial means. Like during the day when it gets really hot in there, you have to be able to open it, ventilate it, run a fan, open a door or window, something like that. That has to be done manually, meaning you physically have to be around paying attention to the temperatures and doing that, unless you want to set up, there are automated ones where there's a little thermometer and it'll open and close the vents when temperatures get too hot without you having to manually be there and do it. And those tend to work. They sometimes fail. Anybody who actually relies on a greenhouse for income probably has temperature warning gauges that go straight to their bedroom or straight to their cell phone, because even the automated systems like this do sometimes fail, and you can, if you're relying on that for your income, you could lose your entire year's income in one night or one day if it gets too hot or too cold in there and everything dies. And to run the automated things, they require some kind of power source. That's more, expense to get those kinds of things, because if you don't let heat out, you will cook your plants on a hot sunny day. And then even on the same day, when you have cooked most of your plants to death, you can still freeze them at night. Of course, greenhouses can be heated, but back to what I said about glass and plastic and other see-through things don't tend to insulate well. Heating them is quite a big proposition if you live somewhere very cold. So for me here, because realistically I'm not going to be running an electric heater, same reason I don't have electric heat or most other electrical things in my house, my power is very limited, I would have to, unless I wanted to install some kind of gas burner or something, I'd need to run a second separate wood stove inside the greenhouse, and it would be just like the cooling part. Unless there was a way, and there's not really a good way to put a wood stove, pellet stove maybe, but not a wood stove, on a thermostat. So I would have to manually be here at all times, checking the temperature and maintaining it in a second structure in addition to the house, and it would go through a significant amount more wood than the house, because of course my house is very well insulated. It doesn't take much at all to keep that warm, but a plastic or glass or any other kind of structure that lets most of the sunlight through, which plants need, does not insulate well. So heating would be a huge issue and a huge expense to actually get a more lengthened growing season that wasn't just hot during the day and then everything died at night. And it would require daytime temperature management. And those things would mean it would be very hard to ever be gone from the house, even for like when I go clean for an 8-hour day for somebody, everything could die in that period of hours when I wasn't here. If it was, cold in the morning when I left, and then very sunny, everything could cook to death before I got home, and so on. So that's two of my reasons I don't have a greenhouse currently. The management of temperature that would be necessary, and the infrastructure that would be required to be moved at some point. And then the other big one, of course, here would be snow load. If you watch the videos of my parents' greenhouse, even in their much less snowy area, and you've probably seen this happen to other people, you might remember that they had a greenhouse collapse under snow load. Now, I do have a friend here who has a greenhouse, and they're the ones that I actually buy some starts from that I can't grow myself. They remove, because of the snow loads here, roofs on houses here, by the way, building code says they're to be built to 180 pounds per square foot, so that gives you some idea of what snow load is expected. So my friends, for their greenhouse, they simply remove all of the plastic in the fall, and so that it can't catch the snow and collapse the greenhouse, because then you just have kind of the rib skeleton frame there. And then when they go to put it back up they try to do it at the end of February this year. They told me they weren't even able to get it back up till mid-March. But when they go to put it back up, then they have to do the same kind of constant maintenance. Every single time it snows, because of course it's still snowing at that time of year, they have to go out to the greenhouse, sometimes multiple times per storm. And again, this is their full-time, job and income, so they do this, but sometimes multiple times per storm, clear snow off it and clear snow away from it using like a loader bucket so that it doesn't push in on the sides and collapse it. That would be a huge amount of work if I was going to try to maintain any kind of structure like that here. And they have pretty substantial, poles and hoops and stuff making up their greenhouses are very large. And they're very sturdy. I get a lot of suggestions about, Harbor Freight makes this cool little cheap one. I've even been sent offers to, several companies have wanted to send me greenhouses for free, the little cheap ones like that, if I would review them and so on. And they wouldn't last a single day here. They wouldn't hold up to even one snowstorm, I don't think, even if I was out there constantly maintaining it. So that would be the other big thing. I really need a substantial structure to support snow here. And just to clarify that, because I know most people aren't used to dealing with this kind of snow load, I was just helping, on the property here where I live, fix fences, almost all of which were destroyed over the winter. The snow drove full fence posts, big round, wooden fence posts. It drove them an extra 2 feet down into the ground from the snow pressure, and it does this on quite a few winters. It would have driven them further, but the bottom fence rails actually hung up on the ground at that point, wouldn't let it sink further. If you're familiar with like metal horse or cattle gates that you can swing open and close, they're made out of like 2-inch metal tubes, welded together. The snow bent some of those in half, actually, completely broke the metal. Anyway, that just maybe gives you an idea what the snow load here is actually like and how difficult it would be to build a structure that both let in light and would not collapse under the snow load. It certainly could be done. It would just require a very intensive structure and a lot of very, very labor-intensive maintenance to make that work. And that's just not realistic. My life's already busy enough. I simply can't devote all of my time to making sure a greenhouse stays upright and doesn't overheat and doesn't freeze to death. So those are the reasons I don't have a greenhouse. Hopefully that lengthy explanation makes sense. And yes, thanks everybody. I am very aware of winter gardening techniques. That is how I grow things in my summer non-existent growing climate, growing season. And all of that is fine. Now in the future, I would like to have a kind of greenhouse once I'm on my own place. I would like to be able to solve quite a few of those issues that I just discussed by attaching a small kind of sunroom greenhouse to my house that it would open into the house itself, giving me the ability to use the excess heat from the greenhouse to heat the house on a sunny winter day, and the ability to use the same wood stove that I'm heating the house with to open the doors in the other direction, to heat the greenhouse with at night. So I would only have to maintain and watch and supervise one heat and cooling source for both things. That, and in northern latitudes like this, it would need to go on the south sunny side of the house and so on. So that is, and again, that would have to be built still out of fairly substantial materials. So that is something I would like to do in the future. That is definitely on my long-term goals, but doing that here in this particular location would present a whole lot of challenges, especially when I know for sure I'm going to have to move at some point. So that is why I don't have a greenhouse. Yes, I have definitely considered this. That's the most frequent question. Have you ever thought about building a greenhouse? I am very familiar with how they work, having used them and worked in them, and they are absolutely spectacular for some things in some situations. But putting up a greenhouse does not magically either keep heat in, because again, there tend to be fairly uninsulated structures, and I know there are some that are a little more insulated than others, but none are insulated enough to simply stay warm overnight by retaining the sun's heat for the day. Even my house can't quite do that, and it's got solid, thick, non-sun permeable walls with R21 spray foam insulation in there. And it does an excellent job of maintaining heat, but even it doesn't keep all the heat in and, require nothing external other than sunlight when it's minus 30 degrees or even 10 degrees and so on. Anyway, so that hopefully answers people's questions about why I do not have a greenhouse here. I'm guessing a lot of the people asking that have probably never had one, never worked in one, never really kind of thought about some of the logistics of how a greenhouse actually works and what it does. Now, there are certainly other options like digging things down into the ground and using the ground heat. Having, again, back to long-term plans not here and plans on my own ground, that would be another possibility I would like to pursue. Digging a deep in-ground hole here, for one, again, would be physically challenging since I live on top of solid rock, and would be a huge investment of time and infrastructure, and be something that I can't just pack up on wheels and roll out of here. So that is a no-go in the current situation, though in-ground ones can be useful. But the other thing you got to remember is ground heat varies depending on where you are too in your climate, and here our frost line is 36 inches down, and the actual ground temp below that is about 42 degrees. Again, where I grew up in Pennsylvania, frost line was, I think maybe 18 inches, not 36, and the ground temp below that was 55, which is considerably warmer than 42. So there are some variations there. You'd have to go way deep here, and the ground is still not that terribly warm. So there are options. Most of them just require a huge infrastructure investment, or else would require a whole lot of round-the-clock physical maintenance, or a whole lot of mechanical gadgets to maintain it, and then a whole lot of round-the-clock monitoring of those gadgets to be sure none of them failed. So that is why I don't have a greenhouse here, and a little bit about what I hope to do with having one at some point in the future down the road someplace else. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to address was people have suggested using frost covers to help get my growing season started earlier. I do use frost covers all summer long. They are not, however, terribly good for getting the growing season started earlier, because whether you're using a frost cover or even heavy mulching, and I'm a big fan of mulching to keep weeds down and such, whichever of those you are doing, the ground first has to thaw, actually, because otherwise you're simply going to insulate the cold into the ground and make it defrost less quickly. A little bit like back when I was spreading ash on the snow, and I mentioned you can't put it on too thick or it will actually slow down the snow melting. If I put a heavy layer of hay or grass or compost or whatever over my soil early in the spring, or had it there in the fall before, or put up frost covers when the ground is still frozen, it would actually keep it frozen longer because you would insulate the cold in. So the ground has to defrost first and warm up so that there's some heat to retain before those things are effective. So that's why I use them in the middle of summer, and why they're not really helpful for just making the garden start earlier in the spring. Hopefully that makes sense and answers your questions, and maybe if you're trying to figure out how to grow things in colder climates, maybe gives you some ideas. There are lots of little things that can be done to help create microclimates and slightly warmer places, and the raised beds help with that. My other beds were raised too. They just weren't contained by blocks. They were just scraped up. So that does help a little bit with that, and so on. But there are still limitations, as you can probably imagine. Just if you went to Antarctica and put heavy mulch, a frost cover, and a greenhouse on top of the ground, you would not suddenly be able to grow pineapples. So that's what I'm dealing with here. It's not quite Antarctica, but it is colder than most places, and in all reality, my summer garden should be considered a winter garden because I don't officially have a growing season to grow in. So that's the story on that. I have just a little bit of this going through the dirt to finish yet. That's not quite full, as you can probably tell behind me. I got to shovel up a couple more wheelbarrow loads, and then I'm going to start putting seeds in here, which I cannot wait for. So, if any of that didn't make sense, or I didn't answer your questions, please ask down below. And if you have a greenhouse, I'd love to hear about it and what all you grow in it and stuff. Like I said, having one attached to the house to solve quite a few of those challenges that I just mentioned in the future on my own place is absolutely in my plans. But I'd be excited to hear what all you folks do produce in your greenhouses if you have one. Have a terrific day. Hi folks, Ariel over here. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching these videos. Hopefully you found something beautiful, educational, interesting, peaceful, relaxing, or useful while you were here. If so, find more videos here, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and if you like what you found here, feel free to like and share away so that others can benefit as well. You all have a wonderful day.